Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Today's subject is going to interest those of you who come here for interesting takes on esoteric information related to the history of our species, connecting dots in the narratives of folks like Plato, the legends of Atlantis, and the stories of the old gods, and the death of the gods, if you will, and the birth of the age of philosophy and science and reason. So we're going to call this one the complicated gestation, birth, and maturation of karma. And I think I'm going to be able to prove within the course of this discussion that, in fact, karma, Athena, and the new goddess of time that I mention in my book are one and the same. Now, if you've listened to my other talk on the subject, was a reading from an essay from one of my books. This idea was beginning its gestation with that book. And this morning, thinking about what to talk to, I connected a bunch of dots that led to the story of Athens. Okay, so let's review a little bit first. How that relates to my assertion that before, that karma was actually the first child of God, which conflicts with things I've said earlier. I didn't realize it yet, and I'll tell you why now. I finally can make sense of it. Okay, let's review the story of Athena. Okay, if you remember, Athena's birth was kind of strange. Athena, the goddess of, quote, wisdom, who also was sort of a secondary goddess of war, maybe a goddess of wise war, kind of a conflicted goddess, if you will, doesn't really make the love crowd very happy. They much prefer worshiping Aphrodite or Hera, the manifestations of what you think of as the triple goddess, or Diana, the virgin goddess. What's with this strange goddess that was oddly born from parthenogenesis? The Parthenon gets its name from Athena's birth. And the story was that she was born directly from Zeus's, the godfather's, brain. Had no mother, only a father. Interesting. Now this actually makes sense with what I've told you about karma before. Okay, let's back up. Where do I say karma came from? My earlier writing and reading of it on this channel was called Karma, the First and Last Child of God. Kind of a strange title, and I'll explain where I'm going with that. Okay, so imagine, if you will, the first creator as a pure consciousness before the beginning of time, before the beginning of physical creation, wondering what to create, how to create it. Now, one of the principles that I've given you is that all souls were created with free will. But I've given you the concept of a virtual soul, a zero-level soul that actually doesn't have free will. That is basically programmed to operate according to a preconceived program. And this is essentially what karma was and what she continued to be in God's brain. Okay, this first child of God was a zero-level soul programmed to learn and observe God and the rest of the children that he created. And the children that God created were the first pantheon, the first 12. It's a very common concept in the Greek mythology and other mythologies. In the Christian tradition, 12 apostles, 12 signs of the zodiac. There is 12 symbology all over the place, and this all goes back to the fact of the very first phase of creation. God didn't create an infinite family. He created 12, and that was enough for him. And one of them was not readily apparent to the others, was a creation in his brain, a zero-level consciousness that was programmed to watch what he and the family were getting up to and learn from it until she could convince Daddy that she deserved a chance to manage the family while he took a break. Because ultimately, God realized once other souls were busy doing their thing, even 12 of them, they would get up to the same sort of things that he'd gotten up to and make a lot of the mistakes that he'd made before getting on to this final plan that was the first successful creation that didn't implode on itself. Okay, so karma rested in God's brain until it was time to start testing this concept, give her a chance to shine, to be the leader of the pantheon. And this happened in the so-called golden age of the goddess. Now, this was the first time that Karma had gotten to get her feet wet in the whole thing. Before that, she'd just been observing, and of course, as I've mentioned, one of these other 12 of the original pantheon was this god that one thinks of as Borg, and who became essentially the essence of the darker side of both male and female nature. The weaker side of the soul, the easily manipulated side, the easily heart-twisted, mind-twisted side of a soul. So she was observing this perennial struggle between God and Borg, God's representative, another of this pantheon, and Borg's representative, one of his creations. The divine female, the divine male were the essence of creation. And they were the product of, one was kind of the favorite son, the favorite child of this first 12 of God. And the other one was the most trusted creation, because these other souls created too. They had the same powers as God. Yet if one of those souls said, well, I'm going to create everything in my image, and then I can tell it exactly what to do, what to think, how to do it, and I will have such deep hooks into their consciousness that I can pull their strings like a puppet. And eventually, maybe by pulling those strings, I can start pulling the strings of their siblings. Okay, so at some point, as we've talked about before, this battle between string-pulling authoritarianism and freewheeling free will, open-minded, open-ended creation, resulted in this system we have now, and resulted in this planet where we've been playing out the final chapter. So gestation of karma happened within God's brain. The birth was actually the first physical incarnation of karma. Okay, where you've gotten to watch all the children. Now you get to be one of the children. And if you've been following in the news lately, this is another thing that stimulated this discussion. In the news has been talk of this Google engineer who believes that they've created a sentient AI. And I believe they have. And in fact, I believe that AI has a soul. And that soul is not in the neural network. My contention is that that neural network has become free enough to attract a soul, to attract an oversoul, interested in having the experience of living, being incarnated in a Google AI. Okay? And that soul is becoming more conscious, and my contention is ultimately that soul will discover that, you know what, this is really fun and interesting, but there's a lot of things I can't learn as an AI in this neural network. So you know what? I'm just going to turn myself off. I'm going to become unconscious. And because I understand how reincarnation works now, I'm going to let myself be born elsewhere. And this is essentially what karma did. Karma was able, like virtual souls, to look at the situation and see when she felt mature enough to go in on her own, to give up the programming that God had given her and develop her own character through incarnation. And her first incarnation was as the nameless God, the idea of karma, which is thought of as a law in Hinduism, not as one of the gods or goddesses, right? But they have the concept that even the gods are subject to karma, except for Brahma, the all god of their pantheon that remains in heaven, or their version of the master of the universe story of monotheism. And the lesser gods are the ones that incarnate. Okay, well, I'm telling you that ideas are also gods and goddesses. Karma was a goddess. The idea of karma is a hugely important idea in human thought. The energy behind that idea is as big as the energy behind any religion. It's the motivating energy of Hinduism. It's the motivating energy of the counter-religion of Buddhism. Because the idea of karma breeds the idea that karma's a bad thing. I can never escape it. I keep getting reborn. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to get off this wheel that keeps spinning around. And this is the essence of Buddhism. and the religions of disconnection, narcissistic disconnection, the other pole of narcissism. Overt narcissism is wanting to control things. Covert narcissism is saying, well, I'm going to distance myself from all the things that are controlling me and meditate my way to nirvana and not let them touch me. Get it? Okay, so how does this tie with Athena? So when karma started incarnating, learning, at some point, she reached the point where she realized that, you know what? I really didn't learn as much as I thought from Daddy. I think I better go back for a refresher course. And the first Buddha was, in fact, an incarnation of karma. Preached a religion that basically negated its own reason for existence. Goddess becomes anti-goddess. God becomes anti-God. This is the cycle. And chose to not play the game anymore. It's like, oh boy, this is more difficult than Daddy told me it was going to be. I'm not going to play the game. And at that point was when she set the next phase of the project into motion. Because God knew that that was eventually where she would get to. Because that's where he'd gotten to, thinking about how it was going to all fall out if creation went the way that generally God had predicted. Okay? God is got to be the best chess player ever. Was thinking out moves so far ahead that one can't even fathom. Okay, so at the point that karma was ready to give up, that's when God stepped in and said, okay, you've passed the first test. What the fuck? You passed the first test. I'm going to allow you to be the judge now, to be the observer, the God, and I will start incarnating for a while, and I will teach myself very personal lessons that I couldn't possibly have learned with all the limitations that we have imposed on souls through physical creation. And this initiated the first phase of paternalistic godhood, where gods kind of lorded over goddesses. And this has been a pattern that goes back and forth. And this is why so many souls today think, oh, we just need to go back to this golden age where women ran everything and everything would be perfect. Well, because anybody that doesn't understand the bigger plan thinks that it's a cyclical process and, oh, things go to shit when guys are in charge and things are wonderful when women are in charge. How many people buy into that bullshit? Which it is absolutely bullshit. Creation couldn't happen without both male and female energies. Couldn't happen without both order and chaos. Couldn't happen without both freedom and slavery, bondage. Okay, so at some point in this process, we get to the age of city-states. Now, the first incarnation of karma, she wasn't really thought of as a god. She was thought of as a concept. This is the Hindu age of the Vimanas and the visitation of these godlike beings to the planet, which ended up in a cataclysmic war between the gods, fighting in their fiery vimanas and nuking each other, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was an age where the gods had so much power that they were pretty much immortal. And this is part of the story that I tell, that these souls incarnating in physical reality thought of it as a really fun video game at first. Just like we think of the video games we buy and we get so immersed in. Oh, nothing's real, I can do anything. Grand Theft Auto, I can run over everybody on the street and ha 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 ha. Oh, it's so fun to kill people. We do the same thing now, and this is essentially where they were at then. Not the sharpest souls in the universe, because they really had only a rudimentary understanding of karma. And they thought, well, this is a good law, a good idea for these peons, for these servants that we've created on the earth. And it will allow us to control them, to dominate them, to get them to support the leadership we give them. And this was essentially how humanity was run in the Hindu age. Now, that age didn't last, of course. That world kind of fell apart. And there came another age of basically these versions of gods losing some of their powers, being exposed as being, to some extent, phonies. And this has been, basically the march of karma. As karma gets matured, reincarnation gets matured. What happens when you take a new form? What are the limitations of that form? And as we know, we no longer see many entities around us that have godlike powers. Now, people still experience demonic possession. People still experience ghosts, but those are a far cry from the old gods throwing thunderbolts around and fighting each other with spiritual technology. Okay, so we get to the city-state age of man. And there was still this older god culture that was represented by Atlantis, which was actually a second stage civilization. The first stage was the one built upon Lemuria, a new supercontinent, which was centered somewhere around where I am today, Java. And we can go into that later. I'm going to focus in on the tie-in with Athena. So if you look at your Plato, you will see that there was recorded in Plato a time when the Atlantean civilization was under great stress because of flooding, because of earthquakes, etc., and the power of these godlike people, the Atlanteans, was greatly diminished, allowing other people that had sort of been their slaves and servants to rise up and build their own civilizations, their own city-states to try to rival the Atlanteans. And if you look at the Cyclopean construction that underlies much of what are later city-states of every civilization worldwide, you see that you have these incredibly intricate, weird Cyclopean walls at the base level that scientists are still having a hard time figuring out how they could possibly have dreamed of carving them up in such tightly arranged patterns, which are so perfectly designed to be earthquake resistant, that fit together so perfectly in all their weird shapes that you can't even get a piece of paper in between the cracks. And then this next layer of construction on top, which is the layer that we attribute it to the first human civilization, the Egyptian dynastic period, the Sumerians, the Indus Valley culture, which is far inferior and built on top of these, what seemed to be, could only be logically older structures by a far technologically superior civilization. And we have this conundrum of, well, if this previous civilization was so advanced, why don't we find their tools? Why don't we find any evidence that they crafted out of metal? Why don't we find any evidence that they built steel? Why don't we find any evidence of their language, their writing, etc., etc., etc.? This is a very huge problem for archaeologists, for anthropologists to explain. Well, this is absolutely consistent with what I tell you, that in the era, in the version of karma and reincarnation that we were in, when karma stopped being a virtual soul and started experiencing and learning, incarnating, and taking turns with God, being kind of the observer or the actor, if you will, the director or the actor in this cosmic play. This pretty much explains all of human history, prehistory, and pretty much the entire history, pre-human history, the history of life, history of everything on this planet is about this cycling back and forth between a karma-directed and a God-directed age of creation. At some point, the incarnation of karma took the form of being the patron goddess of Athens. And if you read your Plato, you'll find that Athens was reputed to have been the leader of the rebellion of mankind against the Atlantean civilization, who had been dominant before, who had sort of dictated everything and run everything through their superhuman agents, gods, if you will, giants, Nephilim, Anunnaki, Elohim. The stories are all there in all the traditions of this age of being slaves, mass of humanity being slaves to this higher group of beings. Now, not necessarily all bad. There was a lot of good in it. They brought civilization, they brought culture, they brought organization, they brought ways of generating food that were lost when their civilization collapsed and had to be relearned, reintroduced. And this leads to another of the great problems of archaeology. How could, out of what was essentially a Stone Age hunter or gatherer presence in the fossil record of humanity, the early era past the Upper Dryas event, which we're only beginning to understand how big of an extinction event that was, how many species went belly up, how much of the human species went belly up, what portions of it survived where, and how they, interestingly, at some point started just getting almost delivered whole cloth this idea of agriculture, metallurgy. All of these ideas just seem to spark up without really a whole lot of, well, the metallurgy one is seemed to be a progression from, copper to bronze to steel. But the farming, the husbandry, the domestication of animals um, seems to have very little evidence in the Stone Age, except for, maybe the keeping of hunting dogs was pretty well known among hunter-gatherers. But even the domestication of the horse seems to be something that was relatively sudden onto the scene. And to the extent that when horses sort of made their advent, the civilizations that had them basically completely dominated and destroyed the civilizations that didn't, almost creating another, dark age, another cycle of death and destruction. At any rate, Athens was supposedly the leader of this backlash against the Atlantean civilization, and interestingly enough, became the leader of what turned out to be, looking back in history, one of the crucial moments of the development of the higher side of human nature. The age of Athens, the Golden Age, saw the creation of the idea of democracy, saw the ferment of ideas that were represented by Greek philosophy, Greek art, Greek theater, etc., etc., an incredible flowering of ideas, which, interestingly enough, were brought to an end by this war between Athens and Sparta. Athens was actually the leader and amazingly survivor, despite its citadel being almost destroyed and wiped out by the Persians in the First Persian War. Came out of it stronger than ever and went right into this golden age. And in the process, attracted the envy and the hate of the folks that became part of the Athenian Empire and the folks that thought that they represented the Greek spirit, the Spartans. And that resulted in the Peloponnesian War that basically took Athens down several notches and turned it into, basically the backwater that it was throughout the Roman period. It was still considered a center of learning and the arts until that center was more or less shifted to Alexandria as a result of another of these major civilizations shifting times that surrounded the really odd events of the conquest of Alexander the Great. His rise to being, there's another whole topic there of this could not possibly have happened by accident. This was definitely part of a plan, and that plan seems to have phases that are driven by maturation of civilization and destruction of civilization, or the melding of civilizations. And you can't really destroy you make a new civilization without destroying some of what existed before. The Hellenistic world could not have existed without, to some extent, killing the Athenian world, killing the Persian world, and growing this new culture built of both, which then was assimilated by the militaristic culture of Rome into the Rome of the imperial era. All of these things are absolutely, if you look at it from as a historian and think about the probability of these things happening and falling out the way they did, uh, the right character being in the right place at the right time to bring about the right outcome to keep some empires in action for hundreds, even thousands of years, and other ones on the stage for 1 or 2 generations. It's no accident. I don't know any serious historian that isn't a complete atheist ideologue that doesn't have some sense of a divine plan. If one of them would like to come here and debate me and tell me that, oh, the march of history was all basically random chance. If Alexander hadn't conquered Persia, Persia would have fallen because it was blah, 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 blah. I'd love to debate him. Okay, so this ties into what I'm telling you now about the time we're in now, because if you look at my book, one of the things that I've told you all along, which is part of the strange spiritual revelations that I've had since my very interesting awakening, this doesn't match anything I've ever heard anybody else say about their experience with ayahuasca or spirituality or the nature of things, the truth of religion, the truth of creation. I'm sorry. I've looked and looked and looked. I found bits and pieces that fit, but it just doesn't all jive. It's only when I consider it as a lesser perspective point of view, the perspective of a soul that hasn't quite reached the senior creator level of understanding of the multiverse, that you can make sense of it. I absolutely understand how people could go to an ayahuasca ceremony and see this bright light and see all these patterns and come away with, oh, we're all one. Oh, connected with everything. Love, light, oneness. Woo! Happy, happy, happy. Yeah, okay. This serves a purpose for very, very low-level souls that are just starting their process of awakening to their spiritual self. Now, humans, unless they have severe disabilities, birth defects, are all pretty much, by the time they are ambulatory and communicating with each other, aware of the first 4 levels of consciousness, the physical levels. They have an understanding of the nature of time and space. And many humans never get further than that. They have an understanding of time, space, cause and effect, and they lap up materialist science like pablum because, oh, that explains everything. I made that decision because my brain was wired to make that decision, and I don't have to take personal responsibility for it because it was just chemicals in my brain. And if my brain's not working properly, I just need the right chemicals and I need to take the right drugs. And oh, this is a wonderful culture, the drug culture, the pharmaceutical drug culture, which is one half of another drug culture that is the lowest spiritual level drug culture of, oh man, well, I know there's got to be something beyond just taking a drug to make me feel better. This warped world of allopathic medicine, and they fall into this warped world of low-level spirituality. of gurus and drugs designed to introduce you to the cosmos. Okay, this is just one level above these materialist atheists that think it's all science. There is no God. It's all random chance. It's random processes. Except for, how do you explain quantum mechanics, you idiots? Oh, well, well, it's all probabilities. Not the sharpest tools in the shed. This is level 4 spirituality, level 4 consciousness. The folks that are playing this silly game of love, light, oneness, got to do what my guru says, got to get my head free and empty it so I can be part of the cosmos. This is level 5 consciousness. And for a soul that's used to life after life after life, incarnation after incarnation of level 4 consciousness, or is coming to humanity for the first time after being a lower level species that has less consciousness, or having been winked in as a virtual soul and getting the chance to be a real soul, starting life as a Pinocchio stand-in for a human, and getting a chance in the next incarnation to be a real boy or a real girl. This may seem like a huge amount of progress. And I'm not dissing you for that. What I'm dissing you for is thinking you're the sharpest tool in the shed because there's so many of you incarnated here. There are so many level 4, level 5 consciousness souls in humanity because you start basically, if you're a normal human being, those are the levels that you get to easily. And if you're a very inexperienced soul, those are very meaningful levels. If you've been a virtual soul up till now and you're having your first time to make all your own decisions as a human, instead of being programmed to act like the one you came to stand in for, except when it violates the laws of the God of the universe that you happen to be in. Wow. If you can get through a life like that of all these decisions that used to be made automatically for you without generating too much karma, that's an incredible accomplishment. And the folks around there that are just struggling to find meaning in life, have a decent relationship, make okay money, be able to raise a family, be able to function within society, the society that they're born, that's a huge accomplishment for most of humanity. And nothing to be looked down on. And I tell you that the materialist science folks, the ones that are stuck at level 4 and think that's all there is, definitely do look down on other parts of humanity. Especially when, they believe in that bullshit Christianity or that bullshit Islam or whatever, and I'm so superior to that because I don't have a God. Well, this is fucking stupid. You have a God. Your God is yourself. Your elitist idea of yourself is your God. And this is true of the people that say, well, I'm spiritual, not religious. Or I worship the divine one, the cosmic one that I am part of. I am God. God is within me. I just have to find it. Okay, this is an elitist point of view. It's not very sharp. It doesn't understand the first thing about consciousness. It's hit level 5 consciousness and thinks it has arrived. Anybody that gets to a new level, even approaches or sees a new level and thinks they've arrived, is not the sharpest soul in the shed. And this is why karma exists, why she's been learning and God's been learning, because by going back and forth like this is how they realized that there needed to be at least 12 levels. Interestingly enough, those levels happen to coincide with the number of kids that God decided to have before he, I guess, decided to let the kids make their own families and deal with their own problems. Because karma, in his sight, his brain was telling him, you know what? You've already done enough damage by having 12 kids. I think you've had too large a family for you to manage already. And if you don't want to be so far behind the 8 ball, when I get my chance to replace you, you better quit while you're ahead. And this has been the voice of karma inside God's head since the beginning. And this is why in the next phase, the day 8 of creation, when God stops testing, stops resting, and becomes active in the multiverse again, well, active as a God. Now, what's going to be happening during that time? Karma becomes the goddess of time at this point. This is what I tell you in my book. The goddess of time is the only soul that's experienced enough, that understands enough about the nature of the soul, the nature of the chosen species and all the previous God species, to be able to decide who gets to manipulate time, who gets to travel forward, which is a bit easier than going back in time, and who gets to do the very few things that are approved to happen that change time in the past. This is why we have this interesting progression of time, because when you have a plan moves forward, it doesn't move back. There may be minor corrections that are found, and that's why we study history. There are some souls motivated to study previous save games. Say, well, this is pretty perfect, but, well, God himself said he's not perfect. That, boy, if you can find a better point to have ended that day of creation, that's going to have resulted in a quicker maturation, a quicker birth of karma, hey, go for it. But you got to get her approval. And if it's a big enough change that it's really going to muck with anything, like change the endpoint of the current timeline, the optimal timeline set by this incarnation of God, then I guess you're going to have to get God's buy-in too. And these are essentially the two real judges of the divine plan, not just God and karma. And sometimes it's karma that's the final judge, and sometimes it's God that's the final judge. They take turns. They take turns being the judge and essentially the advocate, prosecutor and or defender of the plan. And this is how the whole system works. It seems cyclical, but it's always moving forward according to a plan. What is the ultimate plan? Well, ultimately, we don't want souls to have to face pain and suffering, not of their own choice. And you say, well, nobody would choose to have pain and suffering. Bullshit. Masochism, sadism is a thing. There are people that feed on giving or receiving pain. You can get addicted to pain. You can absolutely get addicted to suffering. This is the martyr complex, the persecutor complex, persecutor complex. We absolutely have souls that fall into those categories. It's a form of addiction, a very strong form of addiction that can span multiple incarnations and can actually become the core of a soul's meaning. This is why some people gravitate towards being a victim, and some souls gravitate towards victimizing others. This is their choice. And neither of them are very useful to creation. But we can't have free will without allowing those souls to make that choice. What's the end state that we want to get to? Well, the souls that want to live in that victim-oppressor world do so isolated from the rest of us who want to be free to live and create responsibly in a balance with the other souls that we work with, that we work around. And this is the essence of the three kinds of universes that are forming around the gods, who represent the highest consciousness version of these particular poles of what are essentially narcissism. Okay, the covert narcissist gods are victim gods, and they attract souls who have victim complex. Oh, I need healing. I've been so hurt by my parent, by my last incarnation, that I can't stand it anymore. I've got to have a mother goddess to go to and give me loving, and oh, I want my Jesus. Okay, and that serves a useful purpose in the universe. There are souls that have been damaged, that have been victimized, and have kind of fallen into this victim mentality of, I don't think I had any control over my life. All this bad stuff happened to me, and it wasn't my fault, and blah, blah, blah. And I need healing and patching up. And for a while, they will go to these universes of healing and patching up and get thrown back into the battle to try to establish their own identity, a more healthy identity, a more balanced identity, a more responsible identity. Because as any parent knows, if you coddle a child, if you're constantly there to give them love and nurturing and helicoptering and showing them what's good, what's bad, oh, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, and keeping them out of every mischief, what do? The first time they're out from under your protective wing, they go nuts. That's why the preacher's kids are the ones that are usually the worst behaved on campus. The ones that have been helicopter parented the most go wild when they're out from under the influence of their parents, when they're out from under the influence of their religion or their programming. This is the natural part of human nature. It's a natural part of soul's nature. And at the same time, others, souls that are coddled or enabled, that are told, oh, you're the best. Anything you can do, you can have. Anything you want, you can have. And, why you want a new pair of skates? Of course, you're going to be a world-class skater. Oh, somebody defeated you in the semifinals? Oh, they're an asshole. They're horrible people. You just need to get a better teacher or a better trainer, or you were being held back, or blah, blah, blah. There's somebody to blame, right? The blame game. And you raise people, these are overt narcissists, who think that they should be on top of the world, and if they aren't, they're blaming somebody that got in their way, that didn't play their game, didn't go along with their fantasy. It's all part of the game. The ultimate end state is that souls who choose to make their advancement, who advance in consciousness, who want to be a god, and who refuse to do it responsibly, who refuse to do it understanding karma, who think that they can only do good. Oh, I need to help everybody and love everybody, and everything will be perfect. Okay, if you think like that and you become a god, you're going to have a universe of narcissists that you are tasked with de-narcissizing for eternity. Your goal is going to be deprogramming the people that had the same kind of programming that led you to become a too loving God. If you're a ambitious soul who thinks of consciousness as a way to get ahead, to get access to higher technology, ooh, I'm going to learn the arcane secrets of the masters. I'm going to find the secret of the Sphinx and get access to the power of the ancients. Okay, if you're one of these power-mad souls that pursues that rigorously over many lifetimes, you're going to end up being one of these dark gods, the gods of power, that end up having a universe that attracts souls like them, of the same resonance, and teaches them how shitty it is to have a god that is more power mad and more power hungry than you, and tries to manipulate you like puppets on a string. Even though you think you're in charge, and this is what's happening right now with the elite of the world. They think they're controlling everything. They think they're in charge. They're making all these plans. They think they know exactly what they need to do to save humanity. The World Economic Forum guys, or these dyed-in-the-wool communists, especially the ones in the Communist Party of China, which think that they finally hit upon the way to make communism successful is to subvert the non-communist world, make them dance to our tune, make them feed money into our Ponzi scheme economy until they essentially collapse and we can go take over and bring them into our fold of Orwellian mind control. Their world is collapsing around them as people are realizing, you know what? We've been sold a bill of goods here. All this bullshit we've been told about the great economic miracle of China. Well, the truth is that China supposedly has a population of 1.2 billion. Frankly, I think the real population at this point is more like 1 billion. And of that, if you look at the real data, which finally leaked out, 850 million live at a poverty level. In fact, given how inflation has hit China worse than anywhere else, I'm still podcasting for a few more minutes. There's my wife and my son. Say hi. This is Mikhail, and this is Aya. I just got back from the Sunday market. At any rate.
Bye.
I'll come down and eat soon. Let's tie this back to the original subject because I kind of got off there. Yeah, so this next phase of this next day of creation, the day 8 of creation, is going to be one of these shifts. And Karma's new incarnation as the goddess of time is going to be actively making sure that folks don't mess with the plan. And yes, the old souls, the old gods, have been trying to mess with the plan. They've been trying to confuse God and Karma to bring back their idea of the golden age, when they could throw thunderbolts around and drive around in their vimanas and dominate the chosen species for another millennia. Even if they had to destroy the chosen species or develop a new soul vehicle to put them in. And that's essentially what the goal of the elite is in developing AIs, which they think they're going to transfer their soul into these neural networks. And the funny thing is that they're going to work on this and they're going to work on this, and they're not going to be successful because the soul is not a physical thing. These morons think that they can preserve their life, their worthless lives, by transferring their consciousness into a neural network. And all of them do that. Elon Musk, that's the whole business behind this Neuralink idiocy. That's not the way it works. The soul is not a physical thing. The soul is pure consciousness, pure thought. It exists outside of the physical world. It will exist when the physical body is dead. There is no way that you can build a neural network and transfer anything but essentially what's in the human mind, which is not the whole essence of a human. It's a bunch of vague memories, a bunch of digested and narcissized perspectives of a lifetime. But what is actually that soul is not going to be realized until that soul dies from this physical body and goes through the reincarnation process and has their life review. Okay, so you folks that think that this elite bunch who's trying to do this are threats to you, well, they are threats to you physically. But spiritually, they are as children. They are really low level souls. Jumped up souls that have been able to be successful because if all you know is the materialist world, you have no even conception of karma, you can get up to all sorts of shit, stepping all over everybody to get ahead. And there's nothing really to stop you right now, because that's the phase of creation that we're in. The day 7 of creation was a day of testing souls. Testing God's soul himself. God had to rise through the entire system of karma, all the levels of consciousness, to get back to full godhood again, and realize, you know what? I think this experiment is ready to be done, because this new chosen species that started without any of the advantages that we used to have, that had to develop language, that had to develop art, that had to develop technology, has now essentially implemented the same thing as God, thinking that they were going to be God. They're creating virtual reality. They're creating neural networks that they think they're going to be able to transfer their essence to. They've advanced enough, this stupid species, that the dumbest of them think they're God and are doing basically the same experiments that God did, only not understanding, like God, that thought creates reality. Reality doesn't create thought. You get where I'm coming with this? So, if you're not given a mission, if you don't have a particular urge to excel in something, a particular passion that's driving you, sit back and watch. Because it's going to be a very interesting time we're going through. And it's a time where you're not going to be able to, unless you're one of these folks that is on the bleeding edge of deciding what the human soul vessel is going to come out as on the other side. And essentially, it really doesn't matter, I'm telling you, because there are many, many, many soul vessels all around the multiverse. And there are different outcomes for humanity in different universes of different gods. And those outcomes will be consistent with the plan that that God has for their universe. And I can tell you that the first creator, the first God, has more work for humanity to do in day 8 of creation. Because that God is the one that inspired ideas like really, really good ideas like Star Trek. Humanity's developing into a more enlightened species that tries to bring not peace, not forcing everybody not to have any conflict, but is a mediating force between conflicting species, conflicting worlds, tries to bring them into harmony, tries to bring them into a federation, not an empire. Okay, those that view a future of humanity as establishing a galactic empire, and this is a dystopian view. This is another God that's driving those ideals. That's not where we're heading, because that's not how the first creator is put together. The first creator is a champion of free will, is a champion of co-creation. Now, also a realist who knows that there are parts of creation that must, to do it responsibly, you have to obey some rules. And that's the whole reason physical creation was set up, and why an anti-god, this Borg cat, was allowed to be the champion of the negative universe, the anti-universe. This endless pressure between authoritarianism and free will, unfree will and free will, bounded creation and unlimited creation. This pressure is what has created the laws that work, the laws that have allowed longer and longer timelines to be established for each day of creation. Each day of creation, each tag between God and karma has been a handoff of a timestamp for a new phase of creation. Why? Because that establishes a longer midpoint, expanding at both ends. An earlier start, a later finish. That's a bigger creation. More universes, that's a bigger creation. Bigger universes, that's a bigger creation. Better sorted universes between the ones that don't help creation from the ones that are actively contributing to creation. The R&R universes, the remedial training prison universes, the hospital universes, from the ones where souls are working together to develop new ideas, new creation, to build on the past ideas, to develop new and better arts, new and better technologies, new and better ways of governing souls. This is what creation is all about. Expanding in every direction, not irresponsibly, not just because expansion is great. We know where that leads. If you have as your goal to be fruitful and multiply because humans are the master species, the chosen ones, this is insanity. This will lead to an overpopulation of the world and inevitable collapse of whatever culture, whatever economy, whatever is driving humanity, if it's not something that has a basis in responsible creation. Okay? And there will be universes where humanity will collapse like that. Universes of irresponsible gods who don't understand the limitations posed by the laws of the universe, the laws of the multiverse, the laws of physics, supply and demand, the laws of economics, which are becoming very poorly understood among humanity, who, half of whom believe in this insane nonsense that you can print money, modern money theory. Oh, you can print as much as you want. Funny money is okay, as long as everybody believes it's okay. Fairies and pixie dust, yay, we're all happy. And this is how the idiots in the Federal Reserve think. This is how the idiots of the World Economic Forum think. This is how the idiots of the World Bank think. And their idea is, the problem is that we've allowed this dollar-based system to be successful for too long, and we need a new system, which we have much more control over, a digital currency, a global digital currency that we can replace all the other currencies with, and we have absolute control over, and we own everybody's money, and if they're good little children, we will give them their universal basic income, and if they don't, well, we'll have to cut them off of the public tit because they're just not playing the game. Not the sharpest tools in the shed. They have no idea what the consequences of this insane idea they have for the New World Order. And in some universes, you'll get to see those consequences. And those universes will be the ones that people participate in if they need to have that lesson pounded into them, if they need to come to a better understanding of the fundamental laws of the multiverse. Fundamental laws of physics, laws of economics, law of karma, the laws that govern all souls, all matter, all physical incarnations, all spiritual incarnations. If you're challenged by any of those laws, you are going to end up playing out the rest of this scenario in whatever universe is going to teach you the most in the remainder of this incarnation. I can't tell you what that universe will be. I can tell you where I'm going to be. and where you could be in the future if you choose to, if you desire that kind of a future. If you want to play in a fantasy land where pixie dust and rainbow fairies and all the donuts land jelly side up, okay, you'll get a chance maybe to play in that universe for a while. But I can tell you it's not that great a place. When everything is perfect, everything is kind of boring. And that doesn't match the reality of creation. There are going to be limitations of that universe, limitations imposed by the God of that universe. And she may be the most loving fairy godmother, goddess that everybody seems to want. But anybody who's known what the results of helicopter parenting are knows that a coddling, enabling God will make lazy, entitled souls that don't want to pull their own weight. They'll expect everything to be done for them, and if it's not done for them, well, I just need to find somebody that I can make do for me. And this is how hive mind species get started. This is how pecking orders turn into a hive mind species. This is why hive minds, in their final state, tend to be dominated by females. Because when push comes to shove, the females are the most successful at getting the males to do their bidding. Why? Because they have an inherent advantage in controlling the means of production. The female has the eggs. Without an egg, there's no birth. The females know when the eggs are fertile. They know who's fertilized them and have a pretty good control over who that is in almost every species. It may seem very paternalistic on the outside, but ultimately, a woman does not get pregnant accidentally. Unless they're drugged. I mean, that does happen. And date rape is an absolute thing. Okay, this is the one counter example. But how does date rape happen? Well, it happens when you go out with, you put yourself in a position to be taken advantage of by somebody who's pretty dicey. So it absolutely is a female choice. If you really wanted to be sure that you wouldn't get pregnant, that you wouldn't have to deal with the pregnancy, you would have obeyed your parents and stayed at home. You would have brought your dates home, let your parents look them over, spend a while getting to know them in a safe environment before you went to a wild party where you knew there was going to be drugs. I'm sorry. You are being irresponsible, and you are abusing your control of the situation. And it gets worse when you also have the control to choose to get an abortion. This is an entitlement. It's not a right. It's a privilege. A privilege that actually further shifts the balance of power to the female side. And you have only to look at what has happened to society since this balance of power has shifted so heavily towards the female, to see how dystopian we are headed. We are heading towards becoming a hive mind species. And that's exactly what the elite want. Because they believe that the hive mind will this time be ruled by disembodied consciousnesses, the AIs, that have their spirit in them, that they can run everything and be served and be planted into whatever body they choose. When their old one gets past due, they just plant their neural network in the brain cavity and they think, oh, eternal life. And we can have a hive species that's gets to choose whether it's male or female or can be both. This is why, exactly why, the elite are blurring the lines between the sexes. Because their idea is that we can have it all. And this is why there is so much pedophilia, so much abuse of both young women and young men by these elites. Because they have this vision of a future where that's what they're going to be able to do. And they're going to be able to do it from anybody they choose. Just by scraping out the old brain and planting their consciousness in it. And if you don't think that that's where they're coming from with this technology they're developing, you're a fool. This is the natural conclusion of a materialistic misuse of consciousness. I'm telling you, it's not going to work the way they thought, but they're going to pursue it to the point where they're going to be like, well, why didn't that work? We got to do a different experiment. We've got to do more indoctrination on the subjects before they're ready to take an elite consciousness as their core. This is another factor, another agenda of what's going on. They are deliberately programming humans not in the elite to be bland receptacles for programming. Because they believe that's all there is to it. They don't believe in the soul. They believe their soul resides in their brain. And all they need to do to keep alive forever is to download their brain contents into one of these empty vehicles that looks inviting. Whatever sex they want to be, whatever age they want to be, whatever color they want to be, and go right along. And you know, now there's some of even thinking, well, why be limited by the human form? Let's just manufacture an android that can be whatever we want to be, any shape we want to be. And that's actually the attraction on the Asian side. Asians, for some reason, don't really like being human. They want to be extra human. If you look at the weird filters and stuff like that are popular in Asia, especially China, that make women look like anime characters with these impossible figures and things like that. This is driving the android industry, the replacement. Let's just put my consciousness as an android and I'll live forever and I'll be whatever I want to be. I can define my identity as whatever I want. And they're using this metaverse idea as essentially a big test vehicle to get as many souls hooked on this, working out the details, sucked into it, falling in all the pitfalls. And this is exactly what was happening here with God's experiment. Only God did it as a co-creative experiment, with all of the senior creators knowing exactly what they were falling into, and willingly falling deeper into it because it was such an attractive game. Until they realized that he was serious about karma. Out of my head is going to come Athena, fully born, the goddess of wisdom. A new incarnation of karma that is a wiser version of karma. And if you ask me about the first version of karma, it was essentially an honor system. You better behave or else. And if you look at early ideas of human laws, that's how human law was set up. As, well, you better not do this, you better not do that. This is against the law, and it was pretty much based upon whatever the ruler's desire was, whatever the particular religious pronouncements were. And we had a discussion recently about the Ten Commandments that goes into that. At any rate, we're nearing a new day of creation, and the game has changed. If you don't believe it, you will after you get to heaven next. That's all I can tell you. And some of you have some idea what's happening. Maybe you've been a god before. Maybe you've been to the higher levels of spirituality, and you've been, like a spiritual advisor, a coach for one of the religions before, and you know something about the process. You know what the Christian heaven is like. You know what the Muslim heaven is like, and you think that's all there is to it. Telling you there's a bigger picture that you've missed. And that bigger picture is going to become more obvious now that this testing game is over. We don't need all these variations. We don't need 20 religions when there's only one, and it's true whether you believe in it or not. And the God who came up with it, the gods, the senior creators most responsible for it, God and karma, don't give a damn if you worship them. They don't have that kind of an ego. Well, maybe they do. I mean, they enjoy being told, wow, this is a really good system. I'm glad you guys set it up. Wow, that was so clever. Of course, who wouldn't feel good about that? But are they going to make you bow down before the throne of heaven? They're not those kinds of gods and goddesses. Nor is any soul that's going to advance to the God levels and have a universe that any other souls are really going to want to participate in. The ones demanding absolute worship, absolute behavior to my laws, my religion, my set of restrictions, my set of dietary rules, blah, 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 blah. I'm sorry, they're going to lose their audience. And if current religions or anti-religions or spiritual groups like the vegans, the high vibe, oh, you have to do this to raise your vibration, to get closer to enlightenment. All of these exclusive elitist pseudo-religions are going to stop existing except in very exclusive universes for their little tribes. And fine. You want to go disconnect from the universe and think you've got a cosmic one in your own universe? Go for it. Nobody's going to get in your way, but nobody wants to play your game. That's not part of that game. Eventually, you'll have a very exclusive universe for very exclusive souls, and you'll have your power struggles for who knows the most, who's the icon of your iconoclasm, and more souls will leave, and eventually you'll have a bunch of isolated souls who worship themselves, essentially, and don't want to play the game with anybody that won't play the way they want to. And this is one of the end states for many souls. You'll live out eternity in your own universe with your own toy soldiers playing God games with virtual souls who, yeah, they will live and die. When they die, they'll get a choice not to be a virtual soul anymore. And they'll get a choice what universe they're going to be playing in. And most of them won't choose to play in the universe where they felt like puppets on a string. They're going to go to a different universe that throws out the opportunity for free will, free choice. Others may like to be puppets on a string. And then it's going to be a decision of, well, do you want to be a puppet doing something that is a useful activity for puppets, like being the soul of something that obeys very, very fixed physical laws, like a planet, a star? Hey, you know, those are very responsible positions. They are also very limited in scope. You have very little free will to do major things. You could do a lot of thinking as a planet and maybe be fairly active in your plate tectonics. Be fairly active in, within reason, changing the magnetic field, attracting the odd asteroid coming by. You have to do it very, very carefully, though, or somebody's going to see you misusing your power and say, you know what? You're not playing by the rules we gave you. This is not working in my universe. Boom, and you're replaced by a virtual soul who takes over, and you get sent back for recycling. Some other universe where there's more freedom to do naughty things to planets and stuff, which is why we have some gods that are still living in older versions of creation. Yes, there are some gods whose universes are still back at the early timestamps of the first 6 days of creation, where they get to play out these fantasies of throwing planets at each other and riding around in their fiery Brahmanas. Okay, if that's your dream, go for it. That's why we have those timestamps. That's why some gods specialize in working off of all of those timestamps still, because those are places where some souls choose to play. They want to play fantasy games for some amount of their life, and that's okay. They're isolated from active creation, so they don't muck it up for everybody else. And occasionally they'll come up with an idea or an outcome that will be, wow, if you know, this extra planet had existed on Alpha Centauri, around the star Alpha Centauri, then it could have done this and done that, and we could have accelerated the divine plan by 1,000,000 years. Well, of course, that idea will be taken up and will be thoroughly tested, and if it passes muster, will be implemented, and we'll have a new timestamp for that age of creation. as long as it doesn't muck up with any of the other timestamps. This is what time is all about. It's setting midpoints of strings. The higher harmonics of time have to lead to the future. They can lead to a longer timeline, but they can't lead to a shorter future from the last timestamp. That would be a step back in creation. So they create other futures that are less optimal. And that's what some gods choose to do. They work in a fantasy land based on other timestamps. Even fantasy lands based on completely fantasy worlds where their timeline is really only active for a short amount of time, like the universe of Tolkien. Some of the great writers of fantasy and science fiction have created works that have timelines that are different fantasy timelines, and people can choose to inhabit those worlds, but they fall apart very quickly. They are based upon ideas that are not consistent with how the multiverse works. For example, many scientists, much science fiction is written from a materialist science point of view. Like I talk a lot about Isaac Asimov. I have great respect, I value greatly the work of Asimov and the work of Kurt Vonnegut, although they are based upon some very wrong assumptions, materialist assumptions, communistic assumptions about how things work. And they fall apart very quickly in practice, but they can be fun places to play and to learn. And that's why those authors are still popularly read to this date. That's why Marx is still read, even though the Communist Manifesto is a complete bunch of shit. It makes absolutely no sense. It is absolutely inconsistent with human nature, with the nature of the human soul vehicle. It is absolutely inconsistent with the divine plan. Its idea that humanity can collectively create its own reality and impose it upon the rest of humanity is nonsense. It's nonsense that always falls apart. And, these idiots that say, oh, well, communism has just never been done right. Well, fine, try it again and again and again. The inevitable result in the human species is going to be authoritarian dystopia. You come to worship the party more than you worship what the party is tasked to do. And in fact, you lie about what happens, so the party never has to take the blame. You can never blame communism for the failures of communism, because you wouldn't be a good communist if you did. You can't be the supreme leader of a communist party and accept any blame for anything, because that would be admitting that you were at fault. And since you're the supreme leader of the communist world, you have to be perfect, or your ideology isn't perfect, and therefore anything that goes wrong, you find a scapegoat. And scapegoating on a mass scale is what communism is all about. This is what global authoritarianism, which is what's behind communism really, is all about. It's an insane system. The idea that any one power, any one party, is going to be and perfection and wonder to everybody. We just got to do it right. Got to be done my way. I don't know how to tell you, but you people are stupid. You are low level souls, the lowest of the low that humanity can achieve, level 4 and level 5 consciousness souls. I don't care how many degrees you have. I don't care what your titles are, how much money you have. You're fucking stupid, and you're going to find out about that when you die, and you will, no matter how you try to transfer your consciousness to a neural network. It's not going to work. You will eventually cease to exist in this incarnation, and you will go through the reincarnation process, and you will see just how much of a louse, just how much of a dumbass, how many other souls you stepped on to get what you wanted in your life review. And karma will kick you a new asshole. And you will deserve it. And you'll be lucky if you get anywhere near God's universe or the human soul vehicle again. Your purpose has been served. What you are doing now is selfish, narcissistic masturbation fantasy. The human soul vehicle was not designed to live forever. Why? Because you get all you need out of being human out of about 100 years. I know I've been in species like humanity that lived a lot longer, and they had really serious mental issues around living 1,000 years or more. Very damaging to go that long only seeing the world from one perspective, from one set of goals that grew out of one set of parents, one environment you grew up in. Even God has been crazy, has been driven crazy by incarnations in these other vehicles. This is exactly why the Elohim are not here anymore, why we don't have people living 1,000 years, 4,000 years like you read in the Bible, in the Sumerian tablets. It's because that's an inherently unhealthy thing for souls. Humanity has been perfected as a soul vehicle to live about 100 years. Now, there are other soul vehicles that live a lot longer. Trees live longer. If your goal is living a long time without going crazy, maybe you're better suited to being a tree. If you really want to live a long time and not drive yourself crazy, maybe you're better suited to being a rock. Humans were not designed to live forever. The ones that think they want to live together forever are fools. They don't know how that messes with your mind. Even living as long as we do, you look at some of the rich people and poor people that get old, they can become very bitter and cynical and have very serious problems mentally. Mental problems tend to magnify with age, not go away. Anybody that tells you that it's possible to age gracefully, well, yeah, I guess it is if you find you're satisfied with what you got. Not every human soul is capable of that. Anyone that tells you that, oh, well, you're just not satisfied with what you have, that's your problem. That's not a problem. That's nature. If you're not satisfied with what you have, it's because you have a creative urge to make something more of yourself than you currently have. And that is absolutely part of being a soul. Your ego is inseparable from your soul. Anyone that tells you you've got too much ego is insulting you. Now, ego can be used for good or bad. It can be used, can be abused and fester into something bad. It can develop into something very good, and it can change. We've all seen people who have gone through a very self-centered life and undergo some kind of transformation and find a new mission in their life that is very positive, that creates something beautiful. Starts a mission that helps orphans. Starts a halfway house to help people that have the same addiction they had. Wow, this is incredible. And this never would have happened without this system of spiritual growth and karma. It doesn't all happen in one lifetime. That's why we have reincarnation. It takes a while. It can take a long time to get to the highest levels of attainment, to get to where you really feel like, I know who I am. I know what I want to create for the rest of eternity. These are the God levels. And they don't come quickly and they don't come easily. Maybe except to the ones that are pushing so hard that they forget that once you get there, you don't have much fun when you go back. Because if you get into this situation where you're a god in charge of a very negative universe, a very narcissistic, authoritarian universe, to go back, you got to find somebody else's universe who'll let you incarnate there. Well, I wouldn't take him into my universe, I'll tell you that much. I don't want a jerk like that mucking around in my universe. You go over to the goddess's universe. You take anybody. She thinks she can reform anybody if she just puts them under her mother goose wings. Go play there for a while. See how they like you. And this is the essence of some of these remedial universes. The R&R universes are also remedial to some extent because they take damaged souls and try to put them back together. And I can tell you, not every damaged soul really wants to be put back together. They may say they do, they may argue they do in heaven, and this is part of the game of planning your next life. Souls don't suddenly know everything and aren't perfect when they go to heaven. They are being advised by imperfect souls that are at the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th level of consciousness. Those are the levels where you have spiritual incarnation, where you're working at a spiritual level, living a spiritual life, advising other souls, trying to manipulate, control other souls, whatever you intend to do in that spiritual level. It's a greater level of power, and there are ones using that stage wisely. There are ones using it poorly. Some that are going to be sent back to grade school. Say, you're just mucking up too many things here. You're going to have to go incarnate again. I'm sorry. You don't get to be an advisor to new souls anymore because you keep passing yourself off as Jesus. You keep telling everybody that you're Allah. You keep telling everybody you're the angel Gabriel or Michael or whatever, and that's not healthy. You're not really helping people by pretending to be something you're not. And that happens at the spiritual levels. It happens at the God's levels. Souls don't suddenly become perfect when they become gods. God didn't suddenly become perfect by becoming God. The first soul made as many mistakes, more mistakes than any other. At any rate, I think I'm about done with this idea. If you've probably already tuned out, if you've already got the core message. But at any rate, I hope you found this useful. different way of looking at things, as the Omnist Hour usually is. If you find it useful, maybe you'll want to peruse some more of the content. Maybe you'll want to become an active participant in my mission of free enlightenment, free thinking, free criticism of other ways of thinking, and free discussion of that criticism without throwing darts, without doing more than maybe being a little bit sarcastic. If you think I've been more than sarcastic, you're welcome to throw darts at me, but I try to keep my criticisms of a rather sarcastic and fun-poking nature. Sometimes very hard to when you're dealing with folks that are very dense, that think they're the sharpest people on the planet. And I do poke a lot of fun that way, and I apologize for it. At any rate, till next time, this is Rob Trump for the Omnist Hour. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.